spend so much of our time rushing around from one thing to the next that we sometimes forget to pause and to just be centered where we are. And so Stazio recognizes that moment between moments. When I was at the monastery, every time we gathered as a group, we would practice this. So we'd ring a bell and then just have about a minute of silence. And it's twofold. One is just to ground ourselves and center ourselves in our own body and spirit and to look for the God that is inside each one of us. And the other is to remember that as we come together, we are also leaving behind some of our individual selves and worries, and we are coming together as a community to be in worship together. So I invite us just to be open and to welcome the Spirit of God in us and in this community as we practice a holy pause. explore a little bit more about contemplative spirituality, which is really just the part of our spiritual lives that invites us to go inward and to look at and look for the God that is within each of us. And this is really what I had the chance to experience in depth last month when I spent 2 weeks in an immersion program at Holy Wisdom Monastery outside of Madison, Wisconsin. There were 19 clergy from all over the country that we gathered basically for 11 days to just immerse ourselves in the Benedictine way of life. And this particular monastery follows the rule of Saint Benedict, who was a 6th century leader and writer and monk, who basically said that you can pursue God through daily rhythms of prayer, silence, work, and community. And so that's what these sisters do at this monastery, and that's what they invite their guests to do when they come in. The reality is, of course, very few people have a calling to monastic life. But that said, there is a lot that contemplative spirituality has to teach us. And I would really say there's a lot that we can learn, and there's a way that we desperately need it, particularly for our world today and everything that's happening in our world. And so our readings this morning all have to do with contemplative life and contemplative spirituality. The first we're going to hear is a psalm, Psalm 42, which may be familiar to some of you. In the Benedictine order, as in many monastic orders, the psalms are central to their prayer life. At this monastery, they chant the psalms 3 times a day. That's just the communal part. They also have public or private prayer with the psalms. And the reason they use the psalms, of course, is because the psalms encapsulate the full range of human emotion, the joy and the sorrow, the longing and the lament. And so we're going to hear this morning a psalm about longing. Then we're also going to hear a passage from Mark that shows Jesus' contemplative side and how he also sought that connection to the God within through silence and solitude. And then finally, we're going to hear a quote from the contemporary Franciscan monk and author Richard Rohr, who is contemplative at heart as well, and who will share with us a little bit about the contemplative life and God's presence with us. So let us listen for the word of God.
Join me in reading from the Hebrew scripture of the Psalm 42. As the deer longs for flowing streams, so my soul longs for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and behold the face of God? My tears have been my food, day and night, while people say to me continually, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul. I went with the throng and led them in a procession to the house of God with glad shouts and songs of thanksgiving, a multitude keeping testimony. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you disquieted within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise the Holy One, my help and my God. And from the Christian Testament, we're reading Mark. In the morning, while it was still very dark, Jesus got up and went out to a deserted place. And there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, everyone is searching for you. He answered, let us go to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do. And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. And part from Richard Rohr. Writing on prayer, Rohr says, my starting point is we're already there. We cannot attain the presence of God. We are already totally in the presence of God. What's absent is awareness. God is maintaining us in existence with every breath we take. As we take another, it means God is choosing us now and now and now. We have nothing to attain or even learn. We do, however, need to unlearn some things. And this is the word of God.
Will you join me in prayer? Oh, gracious God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your presence all around us. We thank you for your presence in us. We thank you for the still small voice that you give to each of us. Just tune our ears to hear you calling to us this morning, that we may hear you in new ways, see you in new ways, feel you in our hearts, and use our feet to follow in your way. We pray this in your name. Amen. When our psalmist was writing the passage we heard this morning and capturing that longing of the human heart and to know God, to know ourselves in God, she writes in probably the 9th or 8th BCE, 9th or 8th century BCE, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for you. It was some 13 centuries later when St. Augustine, the famous church father, said a similar thing, but in a different way, where he said, you have made us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And it was probably 13 centuries or so after that that Pascal, the famous French mathematician and theologian, said another way. He said, all of us have a God-shaped vacuum in our hearts. Some say a God-shaped hole, right, that only God can fill. And it is a contemporary monk, Thomas Keating, who just died this last fall, who was a contemplative also, who said that the God that made us, the God that we long to be connected to, is not just the God of the transcendent God, the creator of the cosmos who's out there, but also the immanent God, the God who is right here in our own heart, as close as us to our own breath. And to know this God is to know not only God, but to know our truest selves, and to know ourselves as God's truly beloved. And so the contemplative life and contemplative spirituality is all about getting to know, seeking the God that is inside, that is in here. That's what Richard Rohr is getting at in his quote this morning, which was just wonderful, about how there's nothing that we have to do to attain it. Like, God is always here with every breath that we take. I think about it like Dorothy and her ruby slippers and the Wizard of Oz, right? It's always with us if we just pay attention, right? If we just slow down, if we just have a minute of silence, if we just turn and look inward and stop all of our crazy restlessness and rest in God. That is what the contemplative life is after. It's what we are invited at times to participate in. But it's really, really hard to do. Partly it's because most of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about the deep longings of our heart. There's so many other things going on in our lives all the time. I think about this just because our world gives such short shrift to the contemplative life. I mean, if you think about it, every way that we're measured, it's all outward focus. So much of it is what we produce, whether that's billable hours or marketable goods or new ministries or even children and families. If it's not what we produce, then we're measured by what we acquire, by what we have all around us, whether that's stuff or money or power or privilege. And if it's not that, then it's what we're doing, all the good works that we're doing in the world, and all the ways that we're out there making a difference, which is good. But what contemplative spirituality says is that unless we are also paying attention to the heart, unless we are attending to the thirst in our own heart, the God that is in us, none of that other stuff matters. Because it's in here where we get our deep identity. It's in here where we meet the God that has made us and knows us and has created us just as we are. And so the question becomes, how do we begin to search for that voice, to pay attention to those longings, to try to access that part of us that is that deer panting for God's presence, if we just can find a way to quench that thirst. So how do we do it? Well, I can tell you it is super easy when you live in a monastery. My colleagues and I, we showed up there. We were 19 of us from the ages of late 30s to late 60s, all mid-career, so some second career, all in the midst of really busy, hectic lives. And our instructions were basically, listen to your heart and do what your spirit needs you to do. And that was it for 11 days. And then there was this smorgasbord of opportunities. So this monastery where I was at, they have a deep commitment to care of the earth, which means they have about 300 acres of restored prairie, woodlands, trails, lakes, benches, where you could just walk and sit and ponder God and the meaning of life and your place in it for hours upon hours. They had prayer 3 times a day with the sisters there, where we would go in and chant the psalms. We didn't make you chant this morning, but we chanted all these psalms. There were multiple days a week where we had centering prayer, the Christian form of meditative prayer, where it's silent and we go inward and listen for the God that is in us. Jan and Jane just mentioned prayer reads. We had prayer read stations where we could make our own and then use them to pray prayers as we walk. They had art rooms set up for us, a journaling room set up for us with prompts. They had spiritual directors, like right on the other end of an email letter or a phone call. They would show up the next day and meet with us for an hour. I mean, this was like a minister's dream. I could just be here. And really, the only decisions I had to make every day were what to wear and what to do with this vast amount of free time that I had. I mean, it truly was a luxury. And I found myself I was just resonating toward books. They had libraries with just all these books. I was just reading and sitting on these benches by lakes and writing and just getting in touch with parts of my spirituality that I've just not been in touch with for a while. And you all know this. I mean, even in churches, we get so busy with things, and it's hard to slow down and really take the time to pay attention to what we need. And so about halfway through my time there, they started taking us off the monastery into Madison proper. Madison's the capital, and once a week they have these concerts on the Capitol building steps. And so they took us in about halfway through to this concert. And it was such a juxtaposition to go from the quiet of the monastery to this concert with just thousands of people and food trucks all around. And it was fun, but it was a little bit of sensory overload. And then the next day, they piled us in the van and they took us to a food pantry and a soup kitchen where we served about 300 guests from the Madison area. And then the next day after that, they got us in the van again, and we were headed to a farmer's market where they were going to talk about the connection to the earth. And we were like, please, for the love of God, do not take us off these grounds. Like, we just want to stay here. We can go to farmer's markets anytime. We can go to food pantries when we want to. But like, just to sit and read by a lake and have nothing to do, like, no. But they said, that's exactly the point. You can't stay in the monastery all the time. You have to learn how do you carry some of this presence with you? How do you carry some of this contemplation with you? How do you carry some of this connection with you when the world is hectic and noisy and there's thousands of people? Or how do you see the person standing right in front of you? Not as just one more person in the line, but as a person with God inside them. And so part of the point of this whole program is to teach us these practices of stillness, but then to encourage us to figure out how on earth we put them into practice in our daily lives. And not only that, but to offer them to our congregations, to all of us here, as ways, as touchstones, as practices that we can use in the midst of our busy lives. And so part of what we'll be doing in the coming weeks and months is hopefully I'll be introducing some of these practices that may speak to you in ways that you need, and maybe even in ways you don't even know that you need yet, which was what I needed as I came to this monastery. I think this is important really for 2 reasons, and there were 2 very significant conversations that I had when I was at this monastery that I've just been chewing on as I think about how we can nurture our own contemplative lives here at LOUCC. And both of them were with the same sister. So at this church, or this monastery, there are 5 sisters. It's an ecumenical monastery, which means it's both Catholic and Protestant. So 3 of the sisters are Catholic, and then 2 are Protestant. And so one of the Protestants, one's a Presbyterian minister who became a monastic sister, and the other shared her story, and I wanted to share a little bit of it with you. Her name's Denise, and she grew up she's probably in her late 40s, early 50s. She grew up not in any kind of faith background, and she became a teacher in New York City. And she got married, and then she got divorced, and she just her heart was restless. It was looking for something. And so she got involved in Riverside Church in New York City, which is a UCC and Baptist church, and really a flagship church in the area of justice and civil rights. And so as she went there, she it was like her heart opened up, and she started connecting to her faith and to God in ways that she had never experienced. She went to worship, joined prayer groups, she joined a centering prayer group, which is how she learned about the contemplative life. And it just, it pulled her. And so she finally was like, I just want to go deeper. I want to go deeper. And then she said, and the church had nothing to offer me. And at that moment, the pastor and me woke right up, and I'm like, wait a second. I mean, well, it's a beloved UCC church, but also I was like, oh my goodness, are there people here that feel that way? Because Riverside had lots of ways to get involved in the community, lots of ways to be out there making a difference, but what about those of us that are just hungry for more and hungry to go deeper? And are there ways that we are thirsty, that we are longing to be filled? And so part of as I share some of these practices, even things like Statio, what we did this morning, is that maybe, again, some of them will speak to us and speak to the longings that we have in our hearts. The second conversation that was really important is also related to this. And that is that for me, I've always been someone who's been drawn to the contemplative side of things. I've always loved looking inward, reading, thinking, contemplating who I am and whose I am. And yet it's a struggle sometimes. And I think particularly in a denomination like this one, there's a way in which, at least for me, I sometimes feel like it's self-indulgent in a way, right? Or it's removed. It's sort of like, why are we looking inward and navel-gazing when there are millions of issues that need our attention right now? And so I feel guilty sometimes for wanting to do more of the spiritual practices than to be out marching in the streets. And so I asked Sister Denise this as we were sitting next to each other one day. I said, do you ever struggle with this? And she said, yeah, I do. But then she said this. She said, to do the interior work and to go inward and to look for God, it's actually incredibly hard work. When you peel away all the other things that we use to make our identity or to give us value, and it's just you and God, she's like, there's an incredible amount of humility, an incredible amount of love, an incredible amount of compassion that has to come up toward you and yourself. And she said, it is that then enables you to go out and to see others with the same sense of compassion and to see the God in others in the same way. And she said, rather than contemplation and justice being separate, she said it is the ground for how we do our justice work in the world. And I really just appreciated that reframing of it. And I thought, I've heard this before. This is Jesus, right? I mean, this is what Jesus was all about. He was just the ultimate example we have of a minister and someone who taught and served and stood up for justice. And yet over and over again, as we hear in Scripture and as we heard in our lesson this morning, he would find those moments of solitude and those moments of rest and those moments of listening to the longing of his own heart. And it was out of that place that he could then go and serve. Joan Chittister, who is a famous Benedictine sister who has written tons of books, not only about spirituality but also about justice, says in her book called The Rule of St. Benedict, a guide for the 21st century, she says that the monastic heart, or the monastic life, is not about having a good heart. It's about being good for something. And she says that it's from that interior work that we then participate in the justice and the love and the peace of God in the world. So what I hear in all of that is really an invitation. And in fact, I would almost say a mandate to care for our own souls. That we pay attention to those longings of our hearts, that we pay attention to the deep thirst that we have, because it's in paying attention to those, and it's in paying attention to the God that is in us, that we will know God better, that we will know ourselves better, and that we will be able to serve better in the world. And so a question I have for you, just to start thinking about today, but to be chewing on in the next weeks and months, is really, what are you thirsty for? What are you longing for? What are the deep longings in your own heart about what God is calling forth in you? What are ways that you want to know yourself better? And can you think about ways, do you already know some ways that you can deepen that connection to God? We're going to be offering some here, things like silence and different forms of prayers, but I know for many of us, finding time to walk in the woods or finding other practices that engage us, art or journaling, whatever we can do to help quench that thirst that we have, helps bring us closer to God. So all of us have been given this thirst, this hunger, and so may we listen for that and pay attention to that and listen to the God that is already inside each one of us. Amen.
Empty